I'm going to do a brief overview of Walt Simonson's career, but I'm going to focus on what I consider a masterpiece, and I sort of mean it in the medieval sense of an apprentice, shoemaker doing his piece to demonstrate that he now is a master. And while he did work before this, Metal Men in 76 and 77, I think, is where he's full blown. You see who he is going to become as an artist and more importantly, as a storyteller. But first, a plug. Buy my books. If you want to support my channel, please buy Larry Gets Lost children's books. These are beautiful 32-page, full color, hardcover, slipcover books about different cities. He's probably been lost in your town. And at a lower price point, we have Larry Loves board books. These are great shower gifts. And you can get any of these where books are sold, or you can get Larry Gets Lost books through my publisher, SasquatchBooks.com, and my Canadian books through BirdhouseKids.com. Okay, so a brief overview of his career. He went to the Rhode Island School of Design back in the 60s. And this is interesting because at the time, I know this, I went to art school in the 90s, 80s. I went into visual communications, but in the first day of school, they're asking, well, are you an illustrator or a designer? And since the only reason I went to art school is I wanted to do art, I wanted to draw, I said, well, I guess I'm an illustrator if there's two things. But as I went through school, I actually was really attracted to design and typography. And so I feel like I went into art school as an illustrator and graduated as a graphic designer. Walt had a sort of similar exposure for an illustrator, and especially for comic artists. Illustrators then had very little background in typography or graphic design. So he brought that to his work. It's apparent from the start. While he was at RISD, he wrote a story based on Norse mythology, which he later incorporated into his the high point of his career, probably his run on Thor in the 80s. Today, I'll show a little bit of it. He's doing another version, a non-Marvel Norse Ragnarok legend. For his thesis at RISD, he did this story called Star Slammers, kind of a Star Wars-ish, sci-fi. I've never read it. I always hated how it was colored. I feel colorists don't really. Okay, here's my soapbox. I feel colorists don't understand Simonson's ink line. I'll show later, but his ink line is decorative. It's not meant to be airbrushed photographically. Anyway, it always bugged me so much how Star Slavers was colored. Manhunter, he describes, Manhunter was a backup feature in Detective Comics, and it won like an Eisner Award. So this is where he was first noticed, and he went from being kind of a guy who would do backup features to full-time employment as a comic artist. Dr. Fate, I'll talk about this. Really interesting piece just prior to Metal Men, where it's full-blown Simonson. Then did an incredible movie adaptation in '79 of Alien for Heavy Metal magazine. I'm not going to talk too much about it because it's been discussed so much, but his famous run on Thor in the 80s, pretty well respected run on Fantastic Four, late 80s. Then also almost lost, hard to come by, Robocop Terminator crossover that's better than you might think. Okay, so here's Manhunter, 1973. It's respectable, really good storytelling. He's thinking about his design a lot. He's doing his own inking and lettering, I believe, in this. Because he's doing his own lettering and inking, it's not somebody else gluing word balloons on top of his art. He's doing it. So look at how he's engineering, breaking that border, which cleverly actually gives you a little more room so you don't have to cover as much of your art with the type. Trademark of his career are these nice sequential frames. Okay, now the confession I have to make is I vividly remember the first time I laid eyes on Walt Simonson's artwork, and I despised it. I was just a little kid in the 70s. This is the Batman I was raised on and the Batman I loved. Neil Adams, down here on the right, is basically the look, but Jim Aparo was my man. And look at the length of that neck. I just loved that. So this long-necked, long-eared, sort of sweeping romantic cape. That was kind of the 70s Batman I was geared up for. And to his credit, this story where Manhunter met Batman, Simonson's following that model. Also, a little bit of the Terry Austin, Marshall Rogers Batman that was really kind of stylized and cool. So, so this is early Simonson. Manhunter meets Batman, and look at this, almost like a Mignola McFarlane predecessor here. And I do think Simonson was a huge influence on the image artists like Rob Liefeld and Eric Larson, although they tended to imitate the superficial aspects and didn't learn as much of his storytelling. You see the RISD design elements here. This is where I met Walt Simonson. Detective Comics 450, an issue that will live in infamy. And I think he actually discusses it. This was not popular with fans at all, this approach to Batman. It's funny because it's very similar to how Frank Miller would end up doing it to great acclaim 10 years later, but we weren't ready for him at the time. I actually subscribed to Detective Comics. I was so in love with the Marshall Rogers look that was going on at that time. And so then I get this in the mail, and I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought there had been some sort of mistake. This really scratchy, earthy ink line, and then this, who's this stubby-eared, maniacal thug that has taken the place of my elegant Batman. And look how he's playing with the frame. Not only is Batman breaking the frame, he's actually hanging on to it. And this much more menacing than the elegant, lithe Batman. And I guarantee this was not colored red in the 70s, but this is very much where Miller would be going with the Dark Knight. Then I started to warm up to him. Dr. Fate. Now, this is a Joe Kubert cover. He did a lot of the... This is a strange comic called First Issue Special, number 9. So the thing is, they would just... Every issue was the first issue of some new character or some character they're maybe going to bring out. But this one, you can already feel this is full-blown Simonson here. Look at the rhythm in that sweep and this kind of crazy cartoony perspective. Also beautiful font. And I mean, already look how it's a step up design wise. He's having so much fun with the ink line here and these very graphic interpretations of magic. He said in an interview he was heavily influenced by Ditko's Doctor Strange, where he would have these graphic representations of the different type of magic. And so he wanted to do that. So when this Dr. Fate, he was reminded of the typography exercises they had in design class, where you would take a font or a letter form and repeat it and blow it up. See his real playful use of type. So you see how the Ankh is Dr. Fate's symbol. So this represents his cast spell. It's not a minor thing. I can tell that Simonson had a Xerox machine in his studio, which I don't think was common for illustrators. It was much more common for designers, and it was a scaling copier, which was you could dial in the percentage. Some of the early, enlarging copiers would only go certain levels, like from letter to tabloid. He clearly had one, and I'll show later how we know. This was Print Magazine, the sort of journal of graphic design at the time, 1988. Walt Simonson's featured in there. He's one of the illustrators called out for his work in Thor, how he integrated typography into his work, which wasn't being done a lot. Then this is, his wife, Louise Simonson, this is kind of a famous piece of comic trivia. She was Louise Jones. She was a writer, I believe, at DC Comics, and Bernie Wrightson used her for a model for this cover of House of Secrets, which was the first appearance of Swamp Thing. So this was for Heavy Metal Magazine, 1979. So only a couple of years after that breakthrough in Metal Man and the Dr. Fate issue. This came out in 79. It was very close to the release of the movie, so they were working on it during the movie, but they had a lot of good photography. He had the script. He said this was important, they had the likeness rights. A lot of times with these, I didn't realize this, with these film adaptations, they don't have the right to make it look like the actor. So he did in this one. So, and you can see these are pretty decent likenesses. Harry Dean, Sigourney, Yaphet. So here he's having fun with the Geiger design of doing the type in Geiger's trademark. But look at this really nice use of typography, that starship just landing with a thud, and that square representing kind of almost the Dolby sound of that clunk. Oh, this page is really interesting because this is pre-digital. So you can see, and like I said, he had a photocopier. So I think what he did, he inked his ship, photocopied it, painted that, and then cut it out with an X-Acto knife along that black line, and then glued it. You see the puckered like tracing paper. So he was airbrushing that blue, or his colorist. He worked with a lot of colorists on this. Lynn Varley, everybody in town. There's like 6 colorists. So that's done with an old-fashioned airbrush back there with this ship glued on top of it. And then look here, very clearly they are using a paintbrush, dappling that white on top of there. So that's in the regular trade paperback. That's not the artist edition. You can see that. And really, really nice storytelling here. I forget if it's like this in the movie where he's confronted face to face with the alien, but the alien reaches between his legs and sort of nudges him in for the kill. This is from Robocop versus Terminator. Okay. 1992. That is in the midst of the comic bubble, right? Image Comics, foil covers, all that nonsense. So you got Dark Horse Comics coming up the rear. They don't have as much IP as the other studios do. So they're obviously reaching out to the movie studios for things. So they lock up, okay, Robocop versus Terminator. It's kind of a silly sounding story, but they hire Frank Miller to write it because they know if they throw his name on the cover, it'll sell. And then I believe Frank Miller hired his friend Walt Simonson, and Walt had the benefit of the action figures were out by this time, so he had really nice reference. And this story, I think it's difficult to get now because of the legal rights. I'm sure they're owned by 2 different studios, so this trade paperback is actually a little pricey on the internet. I'm looking to sell my artist edition, but get the measurements before you calculate postage. This thing is giant. It's too big to read. I had no idea how big it is. The funny thing about Robocop versus Terminator is it's a hoot. It is so well written and so well drawn by Simonson, but it's a very clever story by Miller at really the height of his kind of pulp writing. And he doesn't just throw Robocop and Terminator into a story together. He comes up with a logical reason for it. It's really a clever story. I don't want to spoil it, but I love it. And look at Simonson. This is a battle. Ed 209s are the good guys, and these the old-fashioned Terminator T1000s are the bad guys. So really great battle, frankly shaped by typography and just Simonson's wonderful energy blasts. Another thing about Simonson's storytelling, even though this is a Miller script, is Simonson's sense of humor. There's lots of interviews. He's a very funny guy. His stories always have a sense of humor to him, and as do his sound effects frequently. If you have Simonson, you got to include some dinosaurs. He's a huge dinosaur fan. And I didn't realize this for years. His signature is a dinosaur. And then just more of his kind of energy porn. I love his explosions. Nobody does better explosions than Simonson. And this is a wonderful story moment where Robocop finally has his first victory against the Terminators, and maybe he can turn the tide. And this is the page from the Art of Simonson book, and it's a really you see how I think a lot of his art gets lost in the coloring. I mean, this isn't realistic metal, but it's just this. He's almost like Erte. It's just this really beautiful graphic language. It just lives in the ink line, and maybe doesn't survive the coloring as well. And then here is the evidence of his xerography from that Art of book. He's using this to represent that the Terminator time travel, where you're kind of all disoriented going through time, and he so the rubber cement and the paper have yellowed more in the years. And just a real fun. Look at the rain of bullets described in that. And then here, this is from his Fantastic Four run. This is probably the best story of that run, called Into the Time Stream. And they're riding on this time machine called the Rosebud 2. But look how he uses a shifted Xerox to represent the rattling of the time continuum. Really clever stuff. Okay, I'm going to jump forward in time a little bit. This is, like I said, I'm not going to go into great depth on his Thor run. It's been discussed elsewhere at length. But his storytelling, he not only was an excellent artist, but was one of the better Marvel writers. And some books was just a writer, not an artist. But he wrote and drew and largely inked, I think, Thor. He did work with John Workman on type, and they just it's hard for me to decide where one ended and the other began, but they really saw eye to eye on how to use typography in comics. And so one of the wonderful storytelling elements in his Thor run is beginning with his very first issue. For only one page per issue, we would go, meanwhile, somewhere in space, there's this thing going on. There's this blacksmith, galactic blacksmith has taken this piece of a leftover universe and he's slapped it on this anvil, and he's banging it with a hammer, and every time he hits a hammer, it says doom in some kind of very foreboding typeface. So this is literally one page per issue, issue after issue. It went over a year. So you're just, as your story's going on, there's this doom, almost like these footsteps following you. And slowly this sword is being built out of this leftover dust from the universe, and confrontation with Odin's ravens. So, no matter what Thor is going through this month, there's something coming down the road that he's not going to like. So this is what he's doing today. This is modern Simonson in the 20s. This is his Ragnarok portfolio. So you see his very stylized approach. Very line-based. You see, he's not really... I don't know, it's a very designed illustration. It's not meant to be realistic. Here's where I fell in love with Walt Simonson, these 5 issues of Metal Men. So the premise is there's these 6 elements: platinum, lead, tin, iron, gold, mercury. And Dr. Magnus, this scientist anyway, has created this, they call it responsometers or something. Anyway, this intelligence that when it's in this amount of metal becomes intelligent and can mold that metal intelligently. And so the metal men, there is one female, platinum, team up together, and the fun is sort of how they combine into different machines and nonsense. Now, as I said, I thought this had never been reprinted. It's been reprinted in this book The Art of Walter Simonson, 1989. So it's been 34 years. Uh, but the good news is both these issues are not highly collected. They're all affordable. And this, I was able to buy this for less than cover price. So it's all findable if you can find it. As I just did, he's got to give this long explanation. Got to provide a lot of room for the backstory of the metal men. But look at these bolts. How he's created a physical metal shape for the narrative and the bio, the little things, and look at the fun he's having in this energy, in the smashing energy. Even that light bulb, that's crazy. I think he's bringing in a lot of non sort of comic illustrator influences. I'm seeing maybe Rick Griffin a little bit, but clearly having a blast on this. And he knows the characters are so ridiculous. He's not constrained maybe by the fan base that punished him for that detective book. And just this, I don't know how many times this page is so ingrained in my memory. I love the wonderful rhythm and movement in Mercury's. So this is a demonstration. The metal men are trying to crack this safe, so they're showing their capabilities. And he's Mercury, as he always states, is liquid at room temperature, so he's trying to find the cracks in there. And just look how much fun Walt's having with that liquid. And the sound effects. He's not using a letterer yet. Yeah, he's doing everything, lettering and inking. So the way he's using his type in a design sense. And again, stylization in all those lines. Also playing with the speech bubbles, very early for this stuff. That wasn't being done very commonly at this time. This is the good doctor. He's insane, and he's in the loony bin losing his marbles. Shred. So you see his sense of humor. See how that word that comes right out of the copy into the frame. And look at this. Tin's getting his ass shredded by Plutonium Man. That nice little thought bubble, narrative bubble. And really squeezing his frames down too. This is also pretty ahead of the time. Then this, again, wonderful explosion and this kind of shocking last page where Platinum is apparently killed. But look how he's using the frames. Ding, 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 ding. So you can feel that head rolling towards you. He's still not doing the cover yet. This is his second issue. Again, look at and I heard the reason this run didn't last that long is they kept switching writers, and so each writer had a different idea. Like that ending where Platinum is killed, they were going to put her brain in somebody else, but then the next writer quickly undoes that. So it just didn't have any arc. But see how he's using that architecture and the real playful use of the flashback, the F being actually the holding the caption, and this kind of funny sound effect. Colorist is really helping on this too. And then, like I said, the fun of Metal Men is how they combine. Look at this awesome vehicle with the sort of the jet engine in the water, zipping along, what is it, Venice or something. Then, boom, this is Chemo. He's, get another glimpse of that vehicle. Chemo doesn't make any sense, don't ask me, but he's got sort of a glass body and he's full of all these toxic chemicals, which is interesting because at the end they just smash him and they don't really say where the chemicals go. But look how he's playing with his, not only that highlight, but the thickness of the line, sort of implying that Chemo is kind of dumb. Really nice cast shadow showing Magnus in the path of destruction. This frame reminds me of a frame from the movie Army of Darkness. Again, look at that beautiful curve on Mercury there. And he does this sort of funny thing with Magnus' jacket, always doing a plaid isometrically. And really nice work. I think he's beginning to do story work on this, but he's using a letterer now. Still doing his own inking. And this is his cover. I love the heels he puts on Tin. Poor Tin always gets smashed up. Using this kind of radius corner to show we're talking about a flashback. Again, playing with the word bubbles. A lot of experimentation with opening the frames here. And so, yeah, here he is. He's already co-plotting. So he's moving into writing. Wonderful energy. And it never wastes look at the curve on that ship. That's just so beautiful. There's real fun in it. And see how he has to have done that zoom, integrating it in with that curve. Now look at that. That is a thing of beauty. It's kind of an ancient temple god. I mean, nothing like it. Type inside that curve. Really beautiful, really beautifully giving the scale of this giant figure, that close up on the eyes. And look at the interesting energy thing. These are obviously done with a circle template. Those little tubes on the fingers shooting out the different meteors, magic. Done with a compass here. Let her rip. Again, the sense of humor. Snap, crackle, pop. Love this vehicle. And then you see that. Look at the giant head there. That's really nice stuff. And then the story's wrapped up in half a page. Love that, the curve on that guy. So that is Walt's lost masterpiece, folks. So hopefully you guys can get it. It'll be interesting to see if I can drive the price of those trade paperbacks up. Anyway, I'll see you again in 2 weeks. Thanks for showing up, everybody.